everybody. I hope everybody had a great long weekend. I think it was very well timed. We needed it. And I hope you didn't spend the whole weekend working. My name is Gloria Castrillon, and I'm a director in the Division for Academic Planning, Quality Promotion, and Academic Staff Development. And it's my job just to welcome you here today and to thank you for taking time off in your busy schedule, which I know everybody is chaotic at this time of the year, to participate. We really do appreciate your support. The division organizes a series of masterclass sessions to provide academics with a platform for discussion and engagement. And what we're hoping to achieve is that the opportunity to model and share insights on different strategies across different disciplines, but all with the same focus of improving teaching and learning, is particularly important given the continuing remote teaching that we are being forced to engage in. Today's session is the 10th session for 2021, and it will be presented by Professor Mbulungeni Madiba, who is the Dean of Education at Stellenbosch University. And the topic that Professor Madiba will be presenting on is translanguaging in teaching and learning in higher education. Higher education, as you know, has historically been perceived as a monolingual space, and the only language in that monolingual space is English, which has been the predominant medium of teaching and learning. Research by many scholars, such as Mazak and Carroll, 2016, for instance, have demonstrated that higher education institutions, however, are often translingual spaces, this is a quote, that reflect the multilingual environments in which they exist. And so that's the end of the quote. And that translanguaging practices allow students and lecturers to build on their own linguistic repertoires to learn content more efficiently and more effectively. During this session, Professor Madiba will share insights and expertise on multilingualism in South African higher education. And this will be done by delving into the dilemmas and the innovations involved in implementing multilingualism to promote quality learning and teaching. Prof. Madiba will then discuss translanguaging theory, giving clear examples of what that looks like in practice, using the Multilingualism Education Project initiated by UCT to demonstrate how translanguaging pedagogy can be used for effective teaching and learning. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Isaac Mdawe to do a formal introduction of Professor Madiba for us. Thank you so much. Dr. Mdawe.
Macheroni, good morning. I have pleasure in introducing our speaker, that is Professor Mbulungeni Madiba. Prof Mbulungeni Madiba is the Dean of the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University. He was previously the Director of Multilingual Education Project, MEP, in the Center for Higher Education Development at the University of Cape Town. He is a full professor of multilingual education. Professor Madiba holds a deleted field degree from the University of South Africa. He has received research fellowship and study awards from several higher education institutions abroad, including the University of Cologne, London, that is the Oppenheimer Fellow, Birmingham, and Harvard, that is Mandela Fellow. He is an established researcher with a C rating from the National Research Foundation. His main research interests are language planning and policy, with a special focus on multilingual education. And now, relax as I call upon Professor Madiba to address us. Prof. Madiba.
Prof Madiba?
Yes, hello, good morning.
You can take over the stage, Prof.
Thank you very much. Thanks really for such a warm welcome. I really thank you for the invitation to all the UJ organizers, who really invited me to come and give this talk, which I think really it will be a conversation, around the implementation of multilingualism in higher education. And I think there is also a lot that I'm going to learn from this discussion, not that I'm going to learn from you. So my really talk, as I said, I was asked to talk about translanguaging in teaching and learning, and my scope of the presentation has already been mentioned there, stated there, and I will try to be as practical as possible. I know there's a lot that has been written about translanguaging, but I will try to give you some concrete examples, and maybe from those examples we'll be able to come up with really good ideas, how we can go about using multilingual translanguaging in our teaching and learning. So I'm downloading my presentation there. It's a bit slow because there are some videos there. I can really understand why it's scrolling is on, but it will definitely, once it's uploaded, I will be able to take you through. So let me just say, I think the way I plan to do this, as soon as this presentation is downloaded, I have a video that I will just play. It's a video on translanguaging, and this video was based on a big project which we did with the University of Birmingham. I think it was University of Birmingham, and there was, I think, another 2 universities from the UK. So it was quite a big project that was funded by the UK. So that project involved some of the leading scholars. Some of you might have read the work of Blackledge and then Angela Chris. So Adrian Blackledge and Angela Chris, I mean, they've written quite extensively on the issue of translanguaging. So you might have really read some of their work, and I worked with them very, very closely. Somewhere around 2015, I was fortunate to get a scholarship to get a sabbatical funding. Then I spent 3 months, with them in Birmingham. And that's where we conceptualized that program, which was entitled Overcoming Barriers in Learning and Teaching in South African Universities. So, so we call that project OBESA. So that was a massive, massive project because we wanted to understand how multilingualism is being implemented in South African universities and what are the underlying theories or ideologies that really underpin that implementation of multilingualism and so on. So that project, in South Africa, it involved University of Cape Town. Then it also involved University of Limpopo, and then Rhodes, and then I think we were something like 4 or 5 universities that were involved in that big project. So at the end of that project, we produced a video that was a big national conference because the conference also involved USEF. So we produced a video, and that video was engaging. It was an engagement of all stakeholders, on what do we understand translanguaging. So usually when I do seminars like this, I start with I've used it several times. I think it might be also available on the website if you want to also view it on your own. So it kind of gives us a better understanding of what translanguaging is and what are the issues, around translanguaging, and what are the challenges, of course, debates around that. So I will show you that video, and then maybe after that, I will just pause for a few minutes so that I can take up some comments and discussion. And then I will again go through the theoretical underpinnings of translanguaging. And finally, I will give you examples of my work at UCT, where I worked at UCT from 2005 to 2019 when I left for Stellenbosch. So all those years, I was really trying to find a way how one can implement multilingualism, of course, in a historically English university, which is predominantly English, how multilingualism can be implemented there. And because of the context, we came up with various innovations, how to implement multilingualism in such a way that it can enrich the curriculum first, transforming the curriculum. You will remember still UCT was engaged in, the all those 2015 decolonial movements and so on and so on. So we wanted really, how do we decolonize the curriculum through multilingualism? And again, how do we promote effective teaching and learning through multilingualism? So the project that I will show you, I think, one project that I did in economics. There is also a lot that I did for maths. So if time allows, maybe I can just give you 1 or 2 slides on for maths that we did. So that might be helpful. But it will depend really how our time is going. But I think the one for economics will demonstrate how one can use translanguaging in reality, in practical terms, in teaching and learning, and how can one take it from its more informal to less informal to more formal in teaching and learning, and maybe assessment. That's another area that maybe we might comment a bit. So I think all this gives you an overview of what we expect to do, and I hope that I will be able to get some few inputs. I know you, Jay, you're also doing some work there, and other colleagues from other institutions. But I think this is an area that we really, translanguaging as we talk now, although in South Africa, there's not much. I know there are people like Professor Makalela, who have really worked hard, on this and writing a lot, but there is not really much study that clearly demonstrates in practical terms how we can implement translanguaging in teaching and learning. And also, there is not much, I think, in terms of policy. We still try to understand how we can implement multilingualism in teaching and teaching. Okay. So in policy, how should our policy enhance formally and embrace translanguaging? So that has not really been done. How do we implement that in the policy? Our policies still reflect the traditional notion, the traditional understanding of multilingualism, but not really the translingual. So in the introduction, I think someone mentioned that, quoting Mazak, that universities now are regarded as they are more translingual. They've always been, universities in Africa have never been just monolingual. They've always been translingual. But these are translingual spaces that the policies that were adopted have always been trying to monolingualize those spaces, and I think that has not really worked. So we are also trying to find out in policy level, can we have language policies? I call them translanguaged. Can we have translanguaged language policies? Instead of just saying multilingual, can we have translanguaged language policies? So these are policies that embrace translanguaging. So at Stellenbosch is busy revising its policy at the moment. And it's very fascinating that Stellenbosch, maybe because of influences of people like myself, they have now, adopted something that I can call translanguaged, a language policy. Translanguaging is in the new language policy draft now. Translanguaging has been adopted as a pedagogic strategy that will be used to implement multilingualism at Stellenbosch. So we are going to help them how they can do that practically. So I hope once other universities see this, they will be able to follow suit and see how they can be able, they will be able to also include translanguaging in policy. We'll be very happy to see that universities are adopting translanguaging as a pedagogic strategy, translanguaging as a language policy, which will really help us to go forward. So well, it will be important to see how UJ also do and how other authorities will be able to do that. So I just see that this thing is having difficulty with my presentation. Okay, it's not giving me what I'm looking for.
We can see the first slide, Prof.
Do you see something there?
First slide, yeah.
Okay, okay, just say it's downloading slightly. There's no problem. So, but as I already said, what really what you will see from those slides when they are uploaded, I've already just given you an overview. But what will be very, very important for me, I think it will be just for you to be able to see the videos. And I think this is the video. That is a big video, so I think that it's just taking long. I don't know. I should have just shared from the screen here. If it doesn't, I will shoot it and share from the screen. But perhaps let me really start by, so that I save my time, what is translanguaging, and when the video comes, I will be able to play that to you. So, you know, the notion of translanguaging, it's in South Africa. It's a new thing. In South Africa, it's a new concept that has been really in other countries. So let me just again a minute. We apologize. You know, technology has got its own way. It shows me here, Angie. Are you seeing it now? Because they says now it has failed.
No, Prof.
You don't see it? Okay, it's fine. I will continue talking. I will just call my son, who is an expert, to come and he will, as I'm talking, he will upload it the other way around. We'll just share the screen. Okay.
All right, Prof.
Okay. Okay.
You're muted, Prof.
Not sharing that. Okay. So no, I've just muted because I'm just to give my son the instruction to how to share from the screen here. You will unshare and then try to share it back to the screen. But in the meantime, I will continue talking. That you know, I think you can see it now. Angie?
No, it's still the presentation.
I can see it.
Do you see it?
No, it's just the presentation.
Yeah.
But can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Let me just put on the presentation mode here. Okay, okay. So you can see it, eh?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'll just share from this here. Okay, so as I've already said, I'll really focus much on translanguaging as pedagogy, and then we can talk. So I've just given a bit of my overview. I mean, of what I'm going to do, something that has been outlined, just to share my knowledge and experience on translanguaging pedagogy, and then of course I will be arguing against monolingual ideologies. I mean, or kind of multilingualism that is based on monolingual ideology, and then, of course, I will argue for translanguaging approaches and then I will definitely show you exactly what what I was talking about. So basically, when you talk about multilingualism in South Africa, this multilingualism is based on all these documents. We are fortunate; we have got a very progressive constitution, 1996. Then we've got language policy for higher education, the one that has been revised 2017, and now I think has been adopted, approved, will be implemented to 2022. Then we've got university language policies, and what is also very important are the court judgments. You know, I'm busy studying that and see how these court judgments impact on language policies, or how do they help us to advance our understanding of language policy. So if you look here, you will see the different, university language policies, which I'm not really going to go through that. So UJ, you might, I don't think I've got, okay, Johannesburg there. I think this is still the policy that you have got English, you've got Afrikaans, I don't know, Spanish is still there, or Sisulu, Northern Sotho, Sisulu, then isiZulu. So I don't know, this is, when I took the data, this was still appear in your documents and so on. So all what we are seeing here is that our higher education are translingual spaces. That means there are many languages that are being used, and our policies tries to, to reflect on those spaces by saying maybe these are the official languages. Others go to as many languages as 9 languages, that like UNISA and so on. So they try to show as many languages, but it's very difficult to capture the reality of translingualism in our university by simple, identifying 2 or 3 languages and say these are the languages that we are going to use for teaching and learning. As I will show you later, that, for example, UCT has identified English, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa as the medium of instruction. But when you look at the reality in our university, this is not reality. This is not the reality. In our universities, at UCD, for example, I mean, there are about 51. The last time when I was there, we counted from the registrations that there were over 51 languages spoken by students or lecturers coming from over 100 countries. So you can see it's a highly translingual space there, and it's in the epicenter of different languages there. But to come up with just a simplified version of language policy like English, and then only 3 languages. And again, also just to say, the medium of instruction, the lingua franca, the medium of instruction is English, and the others will be there. So all these policies are very symbolic. So that's what I always say, you know, whenever I present, you know, our policies are just really job allocation. They are not really reflecting the true nature or the true multilingual nature of our country. And they also call for a kind of rethinking, you know, of how do we think about language policy? What is our understanding of language policy? Again, rethinking about strategies and innovations that we can come up with in order to implement multilingualism in teaching and learning. So, but what we know, the dilemma, that was also just talk a bit about the dilemma. The dilemma that we have, I mean, that was shown, reflected in the South African Human Rights Commission report 2014. It's a big report which was focusing on transformation in higher education. So what this report does, it clearly shows that universities have not really, in South Africa, universities have not been able to implement multilingualism in the way that was expected by the policy. So the policy clearly shows that in many universities, really multilingualism remain largely marginalized. And the other dilemma that we have, as I've indicated, is the language policy complexity. How our understanding of what is language policy. Language policy as a text, discourse, or as a practice. And then another dilemma that we face is the dilemma of language ideologies. Language ideologies, what is our understanding of notions such as language? What is our understanding of notions such as multilingualism, mother tongue, multilingual university? So all these conceptions, although we use them in literature, in our discourse in different universities, they seem to mean different things. What is understood as multilingualism at historically English university is totally different to what is understood as multilingualism in historical Afrikaans universities. It's the same thing, you know, in Black universities. You find that the understanding is not really the same thing. So they are a different understanding of that. So this, when we talk in this, we really need to also look at these concepts and see what ways, what understanding. So translanguaging that I will talk about, it's a way of trying also to understand these kind of notions. Do we have, you know, how do we understand them? It also, translanguaging helps us to advance our understanding of notions of language, understanding of multilingualism. It also helps us to advance our understanding of mother tongue or even the multilingual university. So another dilemma that we have, you know, is a tension between English and multilingualism. In many universities, I've shown from the table of those language policies. What you see there is that most universities have identified English as the primary medium of instruction, and then the other languages, English will be, maybe Afrikaans will be recognized as one of the language that will be taught for acquisition, and African languages will also be the same. And another dilemma that, of course, is always raised is that you know, the dominance of English, which is, you know, Neville Alexander argued that there's nothing that we can do about the dominance of English. English is a dominant language at this current moment, but what we can do is to prevent its hegemonic status. That is, we have to try to make sure that English, although it's a dominant language, it does not replace other languages. Because if that happens, as Neville Alexander argues, is that English is unattainable. The cost of our country to even higher education to use English only as the medium, that cost already is very high. We are losing billions and billions of rands, you know, on students who are not really progressing, who are dropping out. I mean, the rate of success, the completion rate at universities is very, very low across the globe. It's only a few universities where you can have maybe high completion rate within the normal time. Most universities, most students are dropping in high numbers, and students are not completing within the given time. So, you know, now when you talk about really the kind of language policy, the kind of language, we also have to think in terms of economic terms. If you don't want to promote multilingualism because the argument is that it's expensive, now if we don't pay that cost, we are going to pay a very, very hard cost. But the cost that we are paying is very huge. The billions that we are losing, the human resource that we are losing is also very, very huge. So this tension, we have to find a way to resolve it. How do we resolve that? I will argue that translanguaging, you know, it's not either or. It's not either English or African languages. It is really both. So translanguaging helps us, you know, to navigate all these spaces and be able to draw on from different linguistic resources to move us forward. So I will argue that that tension can be easily addressed, can be resolved by adopting translingual rather than just, you know, a fuzzy idea of multilingualism. Now, in some universities like Stellenbosch, I don't know about UJ now, the dilemma of Afrikaans, you know, the dilemma of Afrikaans, how Afrikaans should be preserved. Stellenbosch is a big thing. You might have seen the newspapers. It's a very, very big thing. How do you protect the status of Afrikaans? And it's a big, I mean, it's a big issue. It's a hot issue. But again, it goes back to the issue of language ideologies. If you think that, you know, a language is a thing, a language is our own identity. We are a nation. Our language is our, you know, resource for national identity. So again, the ideologies that are there. So translingual approaches, you know, challenges those kind of ideologies that underpin. If you adopt that Afrikaans is a translingual, that you will say Afrikaans has got all the Khoi and the San languages there. It has got the Malay languages there. It has got all things, I mean, varieties that are there. So you might find at the end of the day, Afrikaans as a translingual does not belong to any particular group, and it cannot really therefore be used for nationalism or the kind of you know, national identities that are projected. So translanguaging helps us to overcome those racial linguistics that can accompany that. Now, the other dilemma that we have is that this is the argument. I think those of you who are speakers of African languages, you will agree with me that whenever you talk about multilingualism, that involve the use of African languages, the objection that comes in is that, you know, these languages, you cannot use them for teaching because these languages don't have they don't have terminologies, they don't have registers. So then in most university language policies that have shown, the commitment that these universities have done is to say that we will develop the African languages first. So that now when we develop the African languages first, when these languages are developed, so these languages then will be able to be used. So it is 27 years now into democracy, and we are still waiting for the day that these languages will be declared fit for purpose, fit for teaching and learning in African in higher education. Not even in higher education, even in basic education. The argument is still saying you cannot teach history through this language, you cannot teach science through these languages. Now, translanguaging, as I will show you, it helps us to overcome that barrier because the burden of communication, the burden of academic discourse, does not rest on the shoulder of one language. That burden is shared across languages. One can really, it's not about language, it's about meaning making. It's about linguistic resources. How do I draw, you know, which resources that I draw from? So in such a way that now African languages will be used, as I will show you, that they're used in complementarity with other languages. So there is no need, where we adopt translanguaging, there's no need to wait. We use African languages as they are now, but in complementarity with English or Afrikaans where it is needed. So that is a dilemma that through translanguaging we are able to address it. And then there is, of course, the dilemma of pedagogical theories, you know, how and practices. Which kind of theories do we use? We know mother tongue-based education. We had all kind of multilingual education and so on. So I will show that translanguaging provides us with a better alternative that we can use as info teaching and learning, and in our discussion later. So I thought I will pose and then we take questions, but I think the advice that I got is that I should just go straight, and then we'll have another whole hour for discussing issues that I'm raising. So just note this, some of the issues that I'm raising now, we can come back to them for our discussion and see how we can move forward. So as I've indicated, my argument is that translingual approaches, such as translanguage, because it's not just, I mean, there are different translingual approaches. There is, I mean, you know, code meshing, that is adopted by scholars like Kanakaraja. Then you've got polylanguaging, we have got hetero, you know, there are a whole lot of other terms that have come into space. Other truncated multilingualism that have been brought in. So there are a whole lot of innovation that people are coming, but all these approaches have one thing in common. They all promote translingual approaches. So my argument this morning is that if we adopt translanguaging will provide a better alternative strategy for the implementation of multilingualism in South Africa. So now the question, of course, is what is translanguaging? You know, the translanguaging approach. Now, as I said, the term translanguaging, of course, it's got its foreign origin. I know some of the scholars, of course, I mean, you know, the decolonial scholars are very, very critical of kind of concepts that originate from the global north and then exported to the global south. You know, that most of the time, this kind of concept, when they come to us, they are imposed on us. And sometimes they do not address some of our circumstances. So there have been argument around that, whether really the term translanguaging, which originated from Wales, you know, it was coined by Chen William. Chen William was one of the Irish scholars, you know, in Ireland, you know, in Wales. In Wales, they also have this tension between English and Welsh. So English still is the dominant language, and there have been initiatives there, movements there to really promote the use of Welsh in education, in teaching and learning. So now what Chen William identified in the 1980s in one of these bilingual education programs. Now he observed from practice. So that's one thing that we realize when we talk about translanguaging, that translanguaging emanated from, you know, observing how multilingual people with two or more languages use their languages in teaching and in learning or teaching. How do they really use this language? So what Chen William observed, you know, from some of the learners or some of the teachers was that, you know, it is possible to use one language to reinforce another. So in other words, now DA was talking about Welsh and English. So you can use one language as input. That language now, that could be an exercise, whatever exam, or a brief lecture as input. But then that language will be used to reinforce the weaker one. So in this case, I think I assume that he was saying that the learners, most of the learners in Wales will be maybe strong in Welsh, but maybe weaker in English. So in that case now, you can use one language as a language of input and then another language as a language of output. So you can use English maybe as a language of input, and then at the same time, you can use a Welsh as a language of output. Output, it could be, you know, you can discuss whatever has been presented, whatever, if it's a tutorial, that can be done in a different language. But you are using one language as input, another language. I think that is basically to understand that his understanding, it was a very, very simple and a proposition. It was not a complicated theories that have developed later. It was just simply saying in Wales, you can use one language as a language of input, and then another language will be a language of output. That language of input could be English, or it could be Welsh. Then the language of output will be different. But what you have seen is that now this really is able, has the potential to augment the people's abilities to operate and to function in different languages. So later, some scholars, I mean, really found that this term has been, scholars like Philip Baker now, because he has written a lot on bilingual education. Now he translated that term into translanguaging. It's Baker who introduced the English one, and then that what is happening here is translanguaging. We are really moving, we are transcending languages here. We are not basing on, we are transcending languages, and this transcending languages, then it became, the term was taken up by other scholars like Garcia, who also written a lot about it. But now Garcia took it out of the classroom and start to say, no, it's not really a question of the classroom here. Even, if people, bilingual people by nature, multilingual people by nature, whenever they communicate, they draw on from different communicative resources. They do not just really confine them. And that also led to the theorization of really what is language, what is multilingualism. So I'll come to that. Let me try to see if this video will play. Just a 10 minutes, I think 10 minutes video. So just bear with me so that we just I can stop it in the middle if it's, I find it's taking too long, but it's 10 minutes. Then just listen to the arguments, You will see there scholars like Adrian Blackledge, and Angela Chris, and some of our local scholars like Makalela, Professor Makalela, and a few others, myself, all those people arguing, discussing about translanguaging and so on. So I hope this video will be able to play.
Prof, we can't hear the sound. When you press share, please, when you say share, just say include computer sound.
Oh, you're not seeing it there?
No, we are seeing it, but we can't hear anything.
Okay, it's fine. Okay, let me try to share again. Okay. Okay. Sorry, we're trying to share that to you. Don't worry. Okay.
Okay, Prof, just click on the cross where you next to that on your. I think it should be on your right. So click on that.
Okay.
And then you click on that again. But when you click on that, you just on top you'll see share with sound, or include computer sound.
Okay. So we have to share with sound. Okay, it will.
Yes.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. Yes. Okay, I see. Yeah. Okay.
We can hear. Thanks, Prof.
You can hear it. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for letting me.
Chris, and I work in a research collaboration with the University of Birmingham and the University of Cape Town. We're working with universities across South Africa to examine how a translanguaging pedagogy can increase access to and success in higher education.
Why does this
for currently disenfranchised students in South African universities?
Translanguaging, it was a pedagogical strategy for teaching balancing two languages. It was Welsh and English. When you come to the African context, the situation is far more complex than that. That majority of the kids in our townships, in our localities, they have 6, 7 languages before the age of 6. So we have got challenges with defining what is the mother tongue, what is first language, what is second language. All those concepts don't quite apply.
Translanguaging as pedagogy is when teachers and students make the best available use of the resources in their communicative repertoires. And we believe, and we have good evidence, that this offers a viable way forward for language policy in South African universities.
We have an English plus, that's what it's called, an English plus language policy, which means that officially the language of instruction is English, assessments are in English, but that multilingualism is encouraged as a resource for teaching and learning.
Really, in some contexts, the use of English in education can really be traumatic. It is the official language, the language that is used predominantly in the media, the language that is used in judiciary, almost everywhere. English is just all over. We breathe English, although we don't live it.
Because we're an English-dominant society, the English has a very high social status in terms of social capital. To actually get teachers to use home languages in a very productive educational way for learning is something that takes socialization.
Translanguaging is not a process of switching from one standardized code into another without reference to the previous languages. It means that you have to have a skill to use both languages, perhaps even in one sentence or one phrase, to make meaning.
Multilingualism used to be seen as a multiple monolingualism, but translanguaging helps us that instead of seeing language as separate, we see languages as fluid, language as mixed. So that view helps us that students are allowed to draw from different resources, linguistic resources which they have, instead of being confined to one particular language which is recognized as the medium of instruction.
Most of the students that get referred to me are African students. I thought of allowing them to use any language they feel okay with during the tutorials, and for me to use it with them to sort of build their confidence in the knowledge, and to actually just double check that they actually understand what the concepts are about. So I only learned years later that it's actually called translanguaging.
At the moment, I'm using translanguaging in my PhD study with the literacy club that I have with the children who are 9-year-olds to 12-year-olds. So they read in Xhosa, they write in Xhosa, they're also in English. So we translanguage between the two languages, but we also recognize that within the languages there are varieties of the same language. So we also legitimizing not just the two languages in the space, but also the varieties that the children speak, like the urban varieties of both languages. And we work with all varieties for the children. We want to give them access to all.
If I don't understand something in English, I must be permitted in a translanguaging environment to ask in a language which I understand. Then if they explain in my own language, I will be able to express well my ideas in the language drawing from my stronger language.
Translanguaging, it maximizes the ability of multilingualism. And it also helps us to have an effective communication. It involves the issue of language production. It helps us to understand the function of language.
So the children, for example, who are in Soweto, I'll refer to Soweto, for example, when they come to classroom, their ways of seeing the world, it's like they're three-dimensional. They connect with the world through more than one language. That's their way of knowing. Now, when they go to the classrooms, the teachers say, in my classroom, you'll only have one letter. And that is almost the direct opposite of their way of knowing. So the whole schooling system is based on a monolingual learner. Therefore, we are failing majority of the children in the schools because we want them to fit into monolingual spaces.
You are looking at the same situation, but you are looking at it from different orientation. One says there's a problem here, so we're going to do this to fix you. The other one says, well, there's a resource here. How do we draw on this resource to make things work better?
It seems as if translanguaging is only about communication. And maybe that is what is highlighted and not valorized enough. It's the whole area of meaning making. No black person actually in this country has got their degree without translanguaging. Yes. We've all gone through that. So yes. I'm concerned which we think that this is a new theory coming. It's not. Yeah. We've been doing it forever. Yeah.
For myself, I'm an isiXhosa first language speaker, but I went to a school where I had to learn English as a first language and Afrikaans as a second language, and then isiXhosa as an additional language to all of that. It's always been something that's been there, and for me it would have made a huge difference if it would actually, it was something that was acknowledged and it was done whilst I was growing up.
Currently, in schools, it is practically used, but it's not officially there. So I think in the curriculum, maybe the curriculum advisors, they need to add it in so that it can be practiced, and then educators and also learners can use it freely. So
I want my students to be as successful as they possibly can be. And I believe that the way to achieve this is to enable them to learn through the resources in which they are the most confident, in which they feel that they can succeed. And I'm not going to ask them to leave those resources at their school gate, as we traditionally do, but we're going to ask them to bring them into the classroom. I think we need to institutionalize that permission for students to use the languages in which they are most successful.
If I start from my own experience in terms of my worldview, the languages I speak, and make sense of what is new to me linguistically and in worldview, it makes meaning better for me. So I'm able to make sense of what I know, and I have been able to make sense of what I don't know using the resources that I have, linguistic resources that I have, sociocultural resources that I have. It is the only way I know where students can learn successfully in a South African classroom.
I'm very passionate about creating an open, engaging learning environment, and I don't see how that can happen in South Africa without a multilingual awareness, without teachers acknowledging learners' multilingual resources. And we're operating in a very constrained English-dominant environment, and so we're very eager to connect with other people who are researching and teaching in the field.
From an educational perspective, it's a responsible thing to do because our focus should be on learning. So how do you enhance it? How do you make it happen? And translanguaging is one resource that you can use to make sure that high quality learning happens.
I think, to me, it's a call. What is happening across universities, a call for decolonization. I think, we then begin to decolonize the way we see language, to question the concept of standard. What is language, in fact? What is standard language? What is home language? What is mother tongue? We should not just take those things as a given. So, and I think translanguaging opens a space for us to begin to question some of those concepts that we've been working with.
Translanguaging is the future, and because it is a reflection of the true societies and their ways of being, their ways of communicating. It is in the public space, it is in the social media, it is in people's heads. Cognitively, people are juggling between several languages every day.
It offers a rich platform for people from diverse cultural groups and language groups and whatever group people come from to learn from one another. So for me, it can only make sense.
So I think you have just watched this video. We can come back to questions if later on. But I think you will realize here that just to summarize, our understanding of translanguaging, that translanguaging takes as its starting point the language practices of bilingual speakers. So when people will be arguing, multilingualism is not possible, it's not feasible. When I get to UCT, the issues that were raised was that it's not possible to implement multilingualism at the University of Cape Town. University of Cape Town is an English university. And immediately I realized that instead of arguing at a more theoretical level, I need to understand what is really happening on the ground. How multilingual students communicate? How do they engage with each other? What do they do when they are learning and so on? Then when looking at the language practices of multilingual students, then I realized that the language practices of students, even some of the lecturers who are multilingual, is totally different to that which is being projected by the language policies. So many times there is a disjuncture between language policy as a text and language policy as a practice. So there's always this disjuncture, there's always this discontinuity. What the policy seems to prescribe, it is not really what happens on the ground. Same thing in schools. What teachers say they do is not what they actually do. If you observe them teaching, if you ask them which language do they use to teach, teachers will tell you that we use English. But if you observe them teaching in the classroom, you will realize that what they are saying they do is not really what they do. They practice differently. They teach translingually. They do a lot of things translingually. So same thing. So translanguaging take the language practice of bilingual or multilingual speakers as a starting point. So it looks at how these people draw from their linguistic resources flexibly to make meaning of their lives and also in their learning and so on, as I've said, with students. So it also raises ontological questions. Ontological questions, these are really theories of being, Now, the ontological questions and epistemological questions. So ontological question has to do with, actually, what really happens when multilingual people are doing all these practices, are moving across spaces. What is really actually happens when someone is a multilingual? Do these people have different linguistic space? How languages are stored in the mind? Because we know that connection between the brain, between the mind, our brains, and how they generate language, that is known. So, but the question is how these languages are stored in the mind. If we say I'm a multilingual, does that mean that each language, if I speak 11 languages, 12 languages that I have, maybe a different communicator, does that mean that each language is saved, is stored in my mind separately in such a way that now when I'm trying to do a policy try to regulate that kind of thing? So these ontological questions, translanguaging seems to address them, although it's not a psycholinguistic or cognitive linguistic theories. It's starting point. It denotes that people have got one linguistic system with features that are integrated throughout and from which speakers select from features. So sometimes, when we are teaching, we don't know exactly what is happening in the background. You just see students communicating. You hear me now as I'm talking. You don't know what is really happening in my brain. You don't know which linguistic resources am I drawing from. The output that you are hearing now, it's English. But to be honest, I'm drawing on. My vendor is also very active. My other language that I know, they are also active as I'm talking now. They are functioning at the background. So the theory that underlying translanguaging is that we have got one linguistic system. So which means now it also challenges some of you have done the work of Cummins, that two iceberg metaphors that he was saying. First, he came up with the notion of that we have got one common underlying proficiency. So that means now then the language only differ on the surfaces where you'll have one and then but again, this translanguaging go beyond that and challenges that notion, of having that. But the point here is that we've got one linguistic feature. So that means students, although they might be speaking Afrikaans, they might be speaking English, they might be speaking, isiZulu or isiXhosa. So those students, in their linguistic repertoire, they've got one linguistic system. We can come to talk about this, and they will deploy these linguistic resources strategically as they communicate. Sometimes they will use different modes. Like I'm doing now, my modes of communication ranges from more monolingual modes, but the mode that I'm using does not necessarily reflect what is really happening in my brain. In my brain, things are different there. In my brain, I'm drawing from a common linguistic system, which really has got all these kind of features that I have. So that is the theorization of that. So maybe if we understand this, you might know better when you teach how to facilitate all this kind of thing. Then it also takes the position that language is action and practice. So language is a social practice. Language is not really a simple system of structures and discrete sets of skills. So hence we use translanguaging, the ing there emphasize that now. Language is doing, language is action, language is practice. Language is not just a thing that can be named. Language is not just a thing, that can be counted. It's not an autonomous system. Language, some people like Kana Karaja argues that language is emergent. For example, what I'm talking now, I didn't sit down to have this kind of dialogue language that I'm using now. Whereas as I'm languaging, my goal is to make meaning to you, is to make sense to what I want to present to you. And the language that is emerging now, it didn't exist a priori. I didn't have this set of sentences. So all these things, language emerges. Language is emergent. It emerges as we communicate. And that's how language came to be. When human beings were trying to make meaning, and then they end up evolving kind of systems, kind of communicative means that we have today. So we believe that translanguaging really emphasizes language is a verb. Language is not a noun. The translanguaging approach focuses mainly on languaging. That's what I'm saying here, rather than language. So languaging here is a process of using language to gain knowledge, to make sense, to articulate one's thoughts, and to communicate about using language. So what students always battle with in the classroom is the ability to make meaning. You know, multilingual students will tell you, I mean, at UCT, Black African students will tell you that, you know, we sit in the classroom and we're not able to engage. And it's so frustrating. One said, no, we are being suffocated. You know, we as English is suffocating us. We are not able to make sense. We are sitting there and we know something. But, you know, because we are not so sure whether we'll be able to command English well, the accent that is required. So they keep quiet. Most of Black African students will tell you that, even the lecturer will tell you that they don't really speak much in the classroom. They sit at the back and absorb like sponges, whatever is happening, and then they go and reproduce in the exams. And then now from there, they are out, they go. So translanguaging, because of its emphasis on languaging. So that means when I use translanguaging as a pedagogy, the emphasis is on languaging, meaning making. Students must be able to language, be able to communicate, and they must be able to draw from their different linguistic resources to make sense. So languaging goes beyond the conception of language as a code or as a system or rules of structures. So I know universities like UJ, maybe even VETS, many historically white universities, they put so much emphasis on academic language development. So much on academic language development. This code of academic language is highly rated. But we have realized that at UCT, I mean, overemphasis on academic literacy in the center where I was based. You know, we really had a huge, one of the biggest center of academic language. But once I introduced multilingualism, they realized that, you know, maybe what we need is not academic language. It's multilingualism as a lingua franca that facilitates meaning making, that facilitates languaging, rather than trying to put academic language on. Not that academic language is not important, it's important, but maybe an overemphasis on English academic literacy also has got its own disadvantage, that it stifles creativity, it stifles criticality, which is very, very central to, you know, to learning. So translanguaging promotes creativity, the ability to choose between obeying and breaking the rules. So students are creative in that space. So translanguaging also emphasizes that multilingual speakers draw from a wide range of different sets of features as they communicate. But now what is very fascinating is that sometimes, you know, in translanguaging, the output that you get, the kind of discourse that come out, is not the kind of discourse that, you know, sometimes comply to. Sometimes it really go against some of the normative academic discourses, as I've already mentioned. So now, coming to translanguaging pedagogy, it's a starting point as a bilingual speakers who use their various languages and so on. So this one I will just skip, because I've already done that. I think it's just a repetition of what I had. So what is also important is translanguaging emphasizes agency. Agency is the ability, you know, for learners, multilingual learners, to be able to draw on their full linguistic resources. And this agency, sometimes, it also, students open up spaces for themselves in translanguaging. I've seen students, I mean, even in the middle of UCT, students will open up spaces in their own group discussions. They will open up spaces to use their own language. So they find a way to resist the hegemony and of English and introduce their own spaces. So it ends up, of course, producing some complex discourse practices that sometimes cannot be ascribed to one single language, because sometimes it's a kind of a mixture and so on. But that does not mean that you cannot move it into a pedagogic. So I think basically this is what I really, in terms of, we can come back to other theoretical issues, but what we know that translanguaging support the use of learners, you know, in using their own multilingual. So in summary, translanguaging transcend, you know, the traditional notions of language, structuralist understanding of languages as things, as discrete entities, or as autonomous systems. It transcended that, and now focusing much on languaging which allows learners to be able to draw on from their different linguistic sources. So in contexts like ours in South Africa, where, our education system is based on colonial ideologies, we argue that translanguaging is transformative. It's transformative in such a way that because now it really helps students to be able to draw on their linguistic resources that were marginalized, and it gives them space, it gives them a voice. Students are able to have their own voice, to be able to say, I think, they're able to put their own views there, and it also gives them agency, in that whole spaces and so on. And of course, the issue of identity is very, very important. Students will tell you that, we don't belong here. We don't feel we belong here because of English, because of Afrikaans. But once they allow the spaces to use translanguaging, then they feel that now we are able to integrate. We are also to show our own existence in that spaces. They are also able to show that they are there. Then it's also transdisciplinary because it goes across all the disciplines. So I think this is the theory in terms of translanguaging. There are arguments, of course. There are people who argue that because translanguaging emphasizes a lot of mixture, mixed languages use fluidity, dynamism, and so on. So that's going to disadvantage the already marginalized students. So we are not arguing that the fact that you are using translanguaging, it does not mean that you are saying students should really not learn standard languages. We are saying that it's a continuum. It's a continuum that ranges from more or very less formal to more formal. So I'll show you the pedagogic model that you can take students, from this less formal engagement, talking to written, and then from written maybe to assessment, which is very, very critical at the moment. I won't really do much talk about assessment because we haven't in my project gone that far. So I will give you just briefly the example of a project that I did at UCT. It was a project that I did several projects there to try to demonstrate that if you allow students to use translanguaging, students are able to do better, they understand what they are learning better, they are able to engage better, they are going to perform better. So what we did at UCT was to identify what courses that have got low graduation output. In other, we call them that now courses that are regarded as killer courses. Killer courses, these are courses that are regarded that have a high rate failure. For example, economics was regarded as a killer course, and then mathematics, and then philosophy. So these three courses were identified as problematic, with students failing in large numbers. I did my translanguaging project for economics, then I did one for mathematics. So maybe I won't be able to show you the maths one, but I just want to show you the economics one because it's very important, because we are able to develop this approach to a point where from a less formal tutorials to something that is tutorials that are more formal. So this project was based on, when I started, we identified students who are doing first year in economics in the university. And these students now, most of them were enrolled in the Extended Academic Development Program in the Faculty of Commerce. So I identified two groups. One was the group for isiXhosa, and then the other one was the Chivenda group. So I identified this group deliberately because I wanted to monitor it as I'm a Venda-speaking person. So what we did now, it was a hybrid. At UCT, we had a Vula online project or online platform which students use to all materials, learning, and so on. So I developed a huge economic glossary, which some of you might have already seen it, which one of the glossary was economic glossary, which was translated into all the languages, the official languages of South Africa, including Afrikaans, and it also has English in it. So now I asked these students, we selected these two groups of students. The isiXhosa one the other one I think was 6, the other one was 8 students. Then I asked them to go online on this Vula group. And then I say to them, identify, the term. So identify the term that identified that was deficit. Identify key terms. So the project was about concept literacy. Why I wanted to focus on concept literacy is that many lecturers will argue that, will tell you that our students don't do well. But the main reason is that in economics, they don't understand, although economic terms are, most of them every day. But their understanding, understanding those concepts is key for them to be able to function, to be able to succeed in economics. So we just identified terms like deficit, then that one was opportunity cost, then the other one was capital, and then there were a few more that we identified. So we asked them to go online. and then look at the definitions and tell us if the definition, they're happy with the definition, and then look at the translation and also comment if they like that, they are happy with the translation. Next comments on that. And then from there, I had face-to-face discussion with them. So in those tutorial letter where we do face-to-face, then we'll start again by asking them one by one, what is your understanding of the definition, deficit? Then they will, each of them give me the definition of the concept. This is how to me, deficit is like this. So I did the same thing with the ISXXOSA, then I did the same thing with the ISXXOSA group. So what you are going to hear here, these are some of the discussions, that we have. I just want to just remember that I say translanguaging emphasizes languaging, meaning making, which at UCT, it was the problem that many Black students don't engage, don't talk, they learn in silence, and that was regarded as a problem. So in this one that I'm going to play, I think I just want to see here. Okay.
Colleagues,
please mute yourselves. Hello. Sorry, Prof. I see somebody is unmuted. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Megan, can you mute that person, please?
Yes, I'm just checking who it is, Gloria.
Thank you. Sorry, Prof. Just give us 1 second.
Sorry.
Hi.
So it lost. Let's look at that one. The loss.
I think it's a recorded slide.
Can you? Okay. It's a question. Can you hear me? Can you hear the slide?
Yes, I can.
Let's say kulahleke nje into embalwa deficit leyo kanye iyahlukene kaloku deficit ngila it's the difference between the two.
Okay, so this is just the first discussion. I'll just move to where there's more discussion. So I'll just try to move quickly here. Okay, I just want to see where
between the two.
Okay, yeah, I just want to talk about the difference here. Okay.
The difference between the loss and deficit. Because from my end,
because it's important. Is there a difference between loss and deficit? Yeah.
I said okay, in Kosa, like South Africa,
Imports and exports.
Yeah, imports and exports. Then Atini, import more.
Yeah.
Than no, it's like export more than that's a deficit.
If we import more than I export,
meaning that to spend more than if woman.
That's the same thing. Singayicala ngendlela ezahlukeneyo eqaphela uba siyisondela kwicala le-export ne-import iyaqaphela kwi-export ndiya-exporta ndithenga ngemali yam so into esijonga kuyo pha sijonga kwirand uba yimalini ikhantri eyikhuphileyo yayisa kwamanye amazwe yabe yona ifumana iigutsi ezingakanani ezisuka kwamanye amazwe ekugqibeleni it's not about loss, it's about uba kukhona.
Yeah, so you can see here, look, you can see the red there on the screen. The sound is background. That's why some people are getting confused. They thought it's some people talking. Now, the red, this is English, but the whole mixture, the fluid, how students move between languages. What was interesting when I asked students to give the definition in English. And I mean, they just give me one definition. Deficit is blah, 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 blah. I mean, very short. I think 5 minutes we were done with all the definitions, all the students. The definitions were very, very brief. But the moment I asked them to say ISXXOSA, I thought that they will discuss the terms in pure ISXXOSA, but you can see what they do there. It's not really, that's not ISXXOSA, it's a mixture of ISXXOSA and English. But the question is whether is this English discourse? Is this economic discourse? Definitely this is economic discourse, as they are putting it here. Someone will say, no, this is like Fanaka law. It's not Fanaka law. They are making meaning here. They are languaging and so on and so on. So this project became so successful that I remember at one time the rector called me to come and watch this thing. He came with the registrar to see how, students, African students are able to argue they are able to me, you know, because that's what they're saying, you know, you know, they are able to bring themselves in the space and they draw on from their linguistic resources. In this case now, their linguistic resources is English and Xhosa. So the vendor group also, it was the same thing. You know, I will not go through that. I will just stop there. But now, after we've done this part, it was more tutorials. Some people say, but now how do you really formalize this? So the School of Economics now decided to take this project now in a more formal way. Accounting also did the same thing. I know accounting has got also have the more formal multilingual tutorials of accounting. If you check on the website, you can find them. Then the Economics School of we got money from Department of Higher Education and Training. So we developed tutorials that were also based on translanguaging. So this is a more formal. This is a more formal thing that you can see now here. So that also shows how you can move from less formal discussions and how do you bring this into a more formal way of discussing in a more formal discourse. That's what you can use in economics. So it's the same project progressing because this was phase 2. That was not directly involved with this one, but they draw on insight from my project, the project that I did before. So just listen to this. It's not a very long thing.
Molweni bafundi, namhlanje sizothetha ngesubject esibizwa njenge-GDP, i-Gross Domestic Product. Mna ndingulonwabo James, ndihamba netshomi yam uHluma Sikelwa.
Molo.
Hello Hluma.
Njani namhlanje?
Ndiyaphila Nkosi, njani?
Hayi ndiyaphila nami. Yazi nombuzo endifuna ukubuza wona. Ngaba wabona izinga lokunyuka kwe-GDP?
Hayi, andibabonanga, andiwazi nokuba afunyanwa phi.
Bawafumana kumaphepha ase-Reserve Bank. Bawakhupha qho amanani amatsha e-GDP.
Nenzuzo kunye nenjongo mna ye-GDP kuze ndikwazi ukujonga ukwenyuka kwe-economy.
Ndiyayazi ukuba uthetha ukuthini. Ingcaciso ikhayeleka ilula. I-GDP lixabiso le-final goods and services eliyenziwe kwizwe qho ngonyaka.
Kutheni nje uthetha nge-final goods and services?
Ukuze sigcine izinto zilula, i-final goods zigqityiwe. And then i-intermediate goods, zii-goods esikwazi ukwenza ezinye ii-goods.
Oh, okay, ndiyakuva. Ukuba ndinevenkile ebhakayo ikhekhe. Ikhekhe esilibhakileyo esizothengisa sibiza njenge-final good. Kodwa ii-ingredients esisebenzileyo njengeqanda, ibhotolo, iswekile kunye neflawa sizibiza njenge-intermediate goods.
Ngokuqinisekileyo, njengobubona, ukuba uzosebenzisa loo maqanda ukwenza i-breakfast, loo maqanda wabala as a final good. Kodwa ukuba uzosebenzisa loo maqanda ukubhaka ikhekhe, loo maqanda sizawathatha as intermediate good. Into esizama ukulumka kuyo yile ngxaki ye-double counting.
Okay, so uzama ukuthi uba i-value ye-ingredients zethu kunye ne-value ye-final good yeli khekhe zonke zibala i-GDP.
Hayi, le nto yenzayo ku-double counter. I-GDP yi-value ye-final good. So ukuba ubala amaxabiso omxube uphinde ubale nemali oyifumanayo ngokuthengisa ikhekhe, ngaloo ndlela ubala kabini. Sebenzisa indlela enye kuzo ezo ndlela zombini, kodwa hayi zombini ezo ndlela ngexesha elinye.
Ingaba le nto iyadibana ne-theory ye-macroeconomics?
Ewe, uyakhumbula mos, i-aggregate expenditure ngu-C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So phezulu, jonga phaa phezulu, sine-consumption, kuze i-government spending, kulandele i-fixed capital formation, i-investment, kugqibelise nge-exports ne-imports. So sifumana u-C plus G plus I plus X minus M. Kokhe sisebenzise i-GDP ukuze sibone ukuthi yenza kanjani i-economy.
Okay, so Hluma ukhona into engihluphayo apha. Ukuba besenze isixa esifanayo nonyaka odlulileyo and amaxabiso ethu anyuka ngo-6%, ithatha loo nto uba i-GDP yethu izonyuka nge-6%. Loo nto ithetha uba akunobakho real change, kodwa ke i-GDP yethu ingaba yonyukile.
Ewe, ngokuqinisekileyo, yiyo loo nto besinikeza amanani amabini e-GDP angoku esibabiza i-nominal GDP. Enye ngamanani awalungiselelwe ngokunyuka kwe-prices awo. So sisebenzisa ibase yethu ka-2010 ukuze sikwazi ufumana amaxabiso.
Okay, I think I should just stop it. There's a bit long, lengthy video. But I wanted to demonstrate to you how you can move from more informal kind of discourse to a more formal tutorial. So you can see the one that I've just shown you, it's more formal. So at the end of this project, I had a discussion with both groups, the vendor one and the ISCOSA one, and trying to understand, that, all what I've been trying to do with this project. I wanted to see whether they can really use their linguistic skills, their own languages, in discussion. So the first students there said to me, the problem is that multilingualism is good, but the challenge that they have was that some of them are not educated in deep Xhosa. They said, they speak the Xhosa as their home language, but sometimes it's not the deep. So the question of varieties. So translators usually go for the deep one, the deep. So the discussion there with them, so you can see there, one says, hey, so some of us are not educated in deep Xhosa. We just have maybe home language until matric or grade 7 or something. And then they give us this, and you go to a Xhosa website and it has got like deep, which you have never seen. Then I say, okay, the level, that's the problem, is the level. Then said, yeah, it doesn't help some time because it is just like deep. Then the other one said, Xhosa is too broad. It is like, for instance, even Nase Eastern Cape, it's Xhosa. Bakhona abantu abasithetha uqonde ukuba ewe, it is my language, but I adimuvanga. You can see they're talking about that variety. And then from there, the other one said, hey, it's Xhosa, sinzima kakhulu. Yeyona language. But if singai understand ngale simple Xhosa, sithetha yongoku. So it is, so you can see now what they're saying here. So what they're saying is that this standard language, which is really based on monoglossic ideology, it is very difficult. It's very difficult because standard language, nobody speaks that standard language. It's nobody's mother tongue. Scholars like Marconi argues that these are invented standards, based on foreign languages. In fact, they even call our orthographies as invented scripts because they do not really reflect any reality in our daily life. So the tension between the standards and what I call simple vernac. So that is another big challenge that we've been facing in implementing multilingualism. And my argument is that translanguaging allows us to use what the students are saying. Lay is simple is Xhosa. Saying I understand that ngale is simple Xhosa. They say that is better. So all what we are trying to do now is how do we really put this as a pedagogy? As I said, Stati and Adler and other scholars some time ago, they were still using the notion of code switching. They tried to theorize this, that you can, in teaching mathematics, use informal exploratory talk in a language, and then also same thing in written form, in spoken, and then you can move into a more formal discourse, and then you have to move into English and so on and so on. But the difficulty with the Stati et al. Model is that it was focusing on language, not languaging. They were not really focusing on they were focusing on language as an autonomous system. So that's what they will say, you talk in one language and so on and so on. So we tried to revise this. There's Nakoda in his base at CPUT, and myself are also working on this rethinking. I'm refining this also, but I found his proposed model to be very, very helpful, because what he's arguing, what we are arguing, in fact, is that you need to have this looks like a continuum. You have on the one end, on the one side of the continuum, then you have got a cognitive. So that means now on the one hand, what translanguaging seeks to achieve is cognitive development. Cognitive is focused much on cognitive aspects of learning. And then the other part will be communicative. So translanguaging, the languaging aspect, helps students to be able to access concepts, discuss them in what they call, like I said, you've seen the previous one, students, what they regard as a home language, but not in the true sense of the standard language, but the vernac. So they can do that in spoken form, they can do this in written form. They can write that kind of variety. But the purpose in this part, it's mainly developing cognitive development. When we talk about cognitive development, we're thinking of those skills. If you think the taxonomy of scholars like Bloom, taxonomy of scholars like Barrett, training teaching or developing skills such as understanding, recall, applying, applying all that kind of things, and then maybe the high level evaluating skills of creating, which is the highest level. So these are the key skills for the 21st century for our students. If we cannot develop this part, the cognitive part of our students, that is why we are saying the quality of our graduate is not really good enough. Because you need to have space that allows students to draw on from their linguistic resources so that as they are engaging, they are learning the cognitive skills of working together in collaboration. They are able to develop the skills of critical thinking. They are also developing creativity, which is very, very important. They are also learning the skills of communication, how to communicate with others and so on and so on. So all those are key skills that are now required, that are now needed for the 21st century graduate. So then if you can get this right, this will improve success. Then you can take this moving to a point. So communicating, these are language of outputs. For example, if you are teaching writing at UCT, I used to facilitate the workshops for writing consultants. So I will show them that writing is a process. Teach students to be able to draw on from their linguistic resources. So they need to brainstorm, they need to engage the topic, they need to put their ideas in the language of varieties which they really think that they're comfortable with. Then finally, the output can be a written context, a text. It could be a discourse, which can be edited. So the challenge is that we spend much of the time working with the communication rather than working with cognitive development, and that has been a problem. So translanguaging really, in conclusion, to me, it provides an alternative pedagogy strategy in multilingual context. First, this strategy resolves the tension that is often observed between students, heterogeneous life world reality, and an institutionally maintained idea of single, holistic, and unitary language, which tends to exclude students' existing linguistic resources, which they bring into the academic learning environment. Second, translanguaging allows multilingual speakers to intentionally integrate local and academic discourse as a form of resistance, reappropriation, and also transformation of academic discourse. So at UCT, I realized in other projects that I did, maths, you can see that students really, they are deliberately resisting the hegemony of English and reappropriating their own discourse in their own discussion of the math terminologies and so on and so on. So this is very, very key. Then third, translanguaging enables students to develop their own voice and engage critically with academic concepts rather than learning definition by rote. So thirdly, then concept literacy, in concept literacy, as Bakhtin argues, is that it allows them to come up with their own words, which they can use those words to mobilize other words. And lastly, as I've argued, translanguaging promote deeper and fuller understanding of learning. So I have this project that I'm talking about. If you can go into my resource, this is my reference list. I've published an article that is under number 9 there in 2018 in a book which was edited by Chris and Blackledge, Routledge. That is the book there. So the title is The Multilingual University. So this project I've detailed there, but not looking at deficit, but looking at another term, capital, that you can go there and maybe immerse yourself with some of the discussions that I'm talking in detail. So that book, if you think you should be able to find, it's a chapter in that book that is there. So I think, thank you very much. Let me stop there. I've taken a lot of time that was supposed for discussion. So that will leave us with 30 minutes, maybe for question and answers. So thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you so much, Prof. That was really, really fascinating. And I think a lot of us come from environments where if you are teaching, you are, kind of told only to speak that language and so on. And I was an English teacher in high school. That's where I started before I lectured at university, and that never made any sense to me at all. So it's absolutely wonderful to have real kind of practical and thought through examples of how best to use students' own languages, whatever those languages are, and to allow them also then to teach each other and to learn from and with one another, as well as with, the lecturer to learn from and with the students too. So we've got two questions in the chat. One is, are the glossaries that you referred to publicly available or not?
Yeah, you see, this project is we developed a project that was funded by the Department of Education and Training. It was a collaboration. Yeah, I call it, it's OERTB, that Open Education Resource Term Bank.
Okay.
Open Education Resource Term Bank, which is an open resource. So this is a huge project. We developed, I mean, I donated the economic glossary into that project because it was funded by the department, and it was my collaboration between UCT and Stellenbosch, and UCT and University of Pretoria. So it has got, I think, like something like 12 or 14 disciplines there. That's
amazing. Okay,
so if you Google OERTB, you will see it. But at the moment, I realized that it's not running. When you try to insert, it doesn't. And I checked with the developer, and the developer told me that no, there was just a slight problem. The host platform that was hosting this platform have said they're no longer supporting CQL. So he is now readapting it to a new SQL there. So it will be running soon, yeah.
Okay, that's great. So we'll keep up with that.
It's an open source. You just go there, definitely you'll find all the things. It has got a big list of the academic terminologies and so on. Yeah.
Now, Prof, I wonder if you could talk, because the second question asks, did student performance improve with the, with the multilingualism and translingual practices? But I think if you could talk in general a bit about, so we saw students actively engaging and understanding using a variety of languages and so on, and how does that then translate to when they have to write their exam, for example, and that forces them to write in English? What are your impressions and comments on that?
Yeah, look, I think this is the question that was the first one, does this improve passing scores? When I started this project at UCT, in fact, I mean, as a matter of principle, our center, CHED, Center for Higher Education Development, our philosophy has always been to desist from measuring scores.
Yeah.
In favor of quality of learning. So I think, I mean, the center usually, most of the studies that you can find that came from our academic development center at UCT, it was really never, you will never see this kind of scores that they had 2 marks, now they increase with 10. It will really look at the overall picture, the quality of learning, the improvement of learning. So it was never really benchmarking the pre-testing, this was the score, then the post-testing, after the intervention. So the UCT academic development work is not based on interventionist philosophy. It's based on, so we never, so, but I've been asked that question, but I said, look, I think what we need to say is that we look at whether deep learning students are improving in their learning, quality of learning. And from that project and the other project that I've done, one could really see that the quality of learning, the quality of engagement, the thinking. This is what some scholars like Biggs will argue. How do you move students from surface learning to deeper learning? Scores are misleading. Scores might be misleading, but it will be important. I mean, for maybe certain areas where so I never really use that. Even in maths, I did a big project for maths whiteboard project. What we were interested in with lecturers is students' engagement, and that was good because it was instead students were given worksheets, and then they would solve problems there in the sessions that they're given. And I mean, we'll only look if they're given worksheet in English, and then discuss those worksheets in their own translanguaging. Are they able to solve those problems? And we found very often students will be able to come up with a solution quicker, and maybe jump and say, we got the solution. And then the other English-speaking students will also rally around them and ask them, how did you get it? How did you get it? And then they will show them that. So we find that working. I did that project for 3 years, and it works successfully. So I think that is one part. But the part that you are asking now is, assessment remains a problem. It remains a problem. How do we make sure that we also provide that space when it comes to assessment? So what we have tried to do in statistics, in one project in statistics, we translate the question paper and then ask students to answer, to choose whether they answer in the Xhosa or English. But the feedback that we got, students were saying, because they were not taught, in translanguaging, students said they found the terms strange. Because the terms of translation, they are expressing that term in the exam. So that is the problem of translation question paper, and they want to see if they will answer well. The discourse is new. It's not something that they know. But if they've been taught translingually and then they assess translingually, I assume that they will be able to do well. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Prof. And I think that it points to a broader issue of that our assessment practices need to catch up with in a lot of ways, because we can't expect. We can't put the whole burden of this on the student. You know, our assessment practices by and large need to catch up. I see there's a question in the comments from Maria Vaz, which is, what is the difference between translanguaging and code switching?
Yeah, look, I think the difference really it's ontological and also, you know, epistemological. Ontological in the sense that the difference is that code switching is focusing much on the code, language as a code, based on code ideology. So translanguaging assumes that, code switching assumes that there are codes, that language is a code. I mean, this goes back to the Greek philosophers. I mean, I think it's Plato and so on, who came up with Aristotle, who came up with this code ideology. The Greeks, you know, invented the idea of code, and then it was adopted by the West. So the idea that a code exists, it really is in conflict with language as a practice. So although, you know, how people draw from these resources, it seems to be more or less related. But I think the philosophy that you are moving from one code to another code is different from having one linguistic system where you are not crossing the code. You're not switching across the code. You are just drawing on flexibly from a common linguistic resource. So that's why I say it's epistemological, because now if your theory is that people have got different codes in their mind, in their brains. So what we are saying is that they are moving from English code, and then they cross over to the Xhosa code, and then you want to understand the mechanism of the crossing between these codes. So that is an epistemological question. But if your theory is that no, people have got a common linguistic system, and now in that common linguistic system, there are features of English, there are systems of English that are there, but not coded separately, you know, but students are just drawing on from those codes flexibly. And I think the translanguaging explanation seems to be better than the idea that language are stored separately in the brain. I don't think that theory. So, but overall, the pedagogic aspect of translanguaging and code switching seems to be the same. We seem to be really, you know, students are drawing on from something. Whether you call that a code, whether you call that a common linguistic resource, one linguistic resource, but they drawing on, learners, students draw on from something. Yeah. And that how you describe that process, whether it's a code switching, whether they are transcending their languages, the so-called named languages, or whether they are depending on codes. I don't think speakers really care much. They don't even ask whether it's a code or whether it's a system. I think they are mainly. I mean, I do when I speak. I don't think whether I'm drawing from Xhosa code, English code. Yeah. I just know as I'm talking to you, I'm drawing on from my linguistic resources that I have. Flexibly.
Yeah, and we've all known that experience of having access to a word in one of the languages you speak, but not in the language you want.
Yeah, you see, so so I mean, I think that we still need more time to go, but psycholinguists are really helping us to get out of what really is in this black box. That
yes, exactly. The gray matter in the black box.
Yeah, the gray matter. We still need, of course, more studies there. Maybe brain image scanners and so on, and maybe they will tell us which part of the brain lights up when one is speaking
in a different language.
Yeah.
I think I remember reading a study years ago that was of medical students, and it was looking at indicators of success. And one of the interesting things that came out of that study is that the key indicator of success wasn't actually maths and science ability, but ability in language, and particularly in your home language, whatever your language of expression was, which kind of makes sense to me, because if you are able in language, you are able in more than one language, or equally able to move across in different things. So we've probably focused too little on home language acquisition. Actually, when people are younger, we're trying to catch up at university and school. Yeah. Angie's asked, what are your thoughts on the recently published National Language Policy Framework for HE in terms of supporting the new developments?
Yeah, look, I think it's important. You know, look, starting from tomorrow, the next 3 days, there's a big conference at Stellenbosch. Yes, yeah. So we organized that conference from USEF because there is confusion, you know, especially after these court judgments from UCT, UNISA, Stellenbosch, and so on. So, and then we want to get to the bottom to understand what is the reasoning from the department, because, you know, and how we should interpret that. So fortunately, that conference, I mean, all the rectors will be there, the vice chancellors, the DVCs, teaching and learning. We have invited Chief Mabizela from the department to come and present. We have also invited Justice Albie Sachs, who was involved in the draft of the Constitution, so that he can give us. We will listen to how the department interpret the policies, because you see the problem with policy as a text. The problem is that there's a lot of engagement behind closed doors. What you see as a document which is circulated to us is just a fraction of the big processes, that the ideologies, the political ideologies that are behind that. So those are not made known to us. You know, we don't see them. You just see a text, and then you struggle with we struggle with the text. So my understanding is that still, I mean, the policy is based on monolingual ideologies. As I said, I mean, it's still say that African language, English, will still be, we promote multilingualism, but English, again, if you use 2 official languages, English as an official language still promoted, and African languages still say, you know, they need to be developed. Now, I've shown you in that video, I mean, that is other formal video that I've shown you. Those students are discussing very complicated economic concepts, moving between English and Xhosa. So what more do you want to develop there if students are able to communicate that way? Translanguaging does not say we need to wait. So that's my major difference. My major difference is that in as much as we want to invest in the development of African languages, let's provide these materials to support something that is going. You see, you cannot develop language in isolation. Language developed through use. That's my argument. Language, if you are not using the language, you lose it. Because you cannot develop registers. Registers are developed in use, not behind closed doors. So if we use languages now as they are, in complementarity with English, then in the meantime, we'll be able to develop registers. Whether now as part of communication, you want those registers to be written in pure standards and so on, that you want to do that can be done, but that's communicative to me.
Right.
So I argue that the policy, the shortcoming in that policy, it still assumes that African languages are things that need to be developed for future.
Yes, and it's not the development of the language that's the issue. It's the development of the processes in place to manage the existing languages.
Yes, and promote their use. Yeah. I think that's
Yes. There are two questions in the chat that have just come up. The first, Maria, would you like to ask your question? Instead of me just reading it.
Yes, good morning, colleagues, and thanks to you, Prof, for the presentation. So, Prof, I don't know, have you thought, or are there things already that are in place, perhaps, for how translanguaging could impact teacher education specifically?
Yeah, you see the problem, of course, you see teachers are doing it. Teachers, like you've seen from one of the video, teachers are teaching translingually, but unfortunately teachers are not well equipped in their teacher training. This thing is not involved. And teachers also still, you know, think, I mean, they're still embarrassed to, if you ask them whether they use or code switching, they will tell you, no, we don't, but you will see it then. So in teacher training, we really need to, I know Professor Makalela at VETS, you know, in their teacher training program, they've really embedded translanguaging. And at UCT, some of the groups there that you might have seen there in the School of Education, it's embedding translanguaging in teacher training. At Stellenbosch also, there's a study that was done by one of our lecturers showing that translanguaging is very much prevalent in schools. Even our students, when they go to school, they are confronted with translanguaging. So these are things that we need to embed in teacher training programs, because sometimes if they don't know pedagogically, how do you harness it? You have seen what I did with the tutorials. moving from this format, and then you can really move to more communicative aspect, more academic way, and so on. But students need to know how they can facilitate this in the classroom so that it can benefit students instead of marginalizing them.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Francie, are you still around? Would you like to pose your question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Gloria. Prof Madiba, thanks so much for a great presentation and a discussion. I've just been wondering, we also had, a masterclass on multilingualism. So I'm just wondering, if we look at theoretical underpinnings, is translanguaging a means of achieving multilingualism? So what I mean, will lingualism stay a noun, as you have referred to, or is the idea for it also to be put into practice as a verb, and does it have a different angle to translingualism? These two concepts. Is it intertwined? Is the one a subdivision of the other? Thank you very much.
Yeah, you ask a very important question. At Stellenbosch, we are busy revising our language policy. So the argument was whether this question, we discussed whether we should talk about multilingualism, whether we should talk about plurilingualism, which is predominantly in Europe, where a person speaking different languages, or multi, and so on. So we came to the conclusion that there is nothing wrong with the term multilingualism. Although there are people who query, multi, that means these are different separate things. So, but we think that the term multilingualism in South African context is established, and we don't need. It's more inclusive. It's broader. So within multilingualism, then you have got all these different types. I mean, translanguaging should, to me, form part of multilingualism. But again, we should shift now from a structuralist notion of multilingualism, which sees that multilingualism as a repeated monolingualism. Because that's what you see, that when you talk about multilingualism, we talk about repeated monolingualism. So different linguistic repeat. So I think what I would really argue is that let's retain the concept of multilingualism. It's well established, but the difference was that many people, we did not really engage with the ideology, the monoglossic ideology of language as a things, and within that. So we are arguing, I think, going forward, let's leave multilingualism there, but within multilingualism, then we can say this is how you can interpret multilingualism from a translingual, the multilingual as translingual, as transcending languages. The multi, of course, that's the argument of English. I mean, so on, so on, so on. So I would still prefer that we retain multilingualism. It's a multilingual project, but within multilingual project, we are adopting a translanguaging. It's defined differently. Some people say translanguaging is a strategy. Other people say translanguaging is a pedagogy. Others say translanguaging is a practice. So there are various ways of looking at it. So I will really say I don't think that we in South Africa we need to shift. We change multilingualism. Multilingualism at least is inclusive, but within multilingualism, we need to identify various things. Plurilingualism. So at Stellenbosch, we've agreed that when it comes to pedagogy, the pedagogy that we will use to implement multilingualism at Stellenbosch now, the pedagogy is translanguaging. So we are defending that understanding at the moment.
Thank you very much.
I saw a hand go up, Vanessa, I think. Vanessa, you want to ask a question?
No, I don't want to ask a question. I'm so excited about this, Prof. And I'm thinking back in the years that I was a teacher. I was teaching at school, and I was an Afrikaans teacher, second language teacher. So I had to teach learners who don't speak Afrikaans, second language. And now I see, in actual fact, what I did. It was translanguaging. Because I'm thinking now, oh my goodness, I've done this. And I want to tell you, Prof,
you are ahead of your time.
Yes, I am seeing now it works. And I can say, I was so surprised to find that my students in those days, everybody didn't want them to do English, Afrikaans, as a, you remember they had the second language and all that standard and all that. But I didn't allow my students to do standard. I said all these learners can do English as Afrikaans as it is. And I had 100% pass rates for a number of years. And now I understand it. Thank you so much for making sense to me what I've done. Thank you.
Many teachers are doing that. I mean, many teachers are doing that, but they don't know that is that they're working with translanguaging.
Exactly.
That's lovely. That is lovely. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Professor Madiba. You're really affirming us. Yeah, it's beautiful. So I've got an ideological question, but it's from a very practical, problem. So what is the view of the Afrocentrists? Because I found that the Afrocentrists are not exactly the decolonization people. So would they say translanguaging is half a loaf? What we want is full use of African languages. I'm just asking this because I want to organize a seminar in honor of an Afrocentrist. So, I can see now it's maybe careful space to maneuver around. So I was thinking, should I just have it in an African language? Now, after listening to you, I'm thinking maybe translanguaging is better. I might actually end up inviting you, but I just want you to tell me, Afrocentrism and decolonization. So where is it, do we want to have African languages used at universities, as they are doing maybe in UKZN with isiZulu? Or if you can just, I know maybe it's a bit complex, but I'm sure you've come across this. Thank you. But it's great. I'm feeling very affirmed for my classroom with this discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. You have asked a very, very big, difficult question. That's why I say these things is very ideological, epistemological, the kind of knowledge system that you are bringing in. So if it works like scholars like Garcia, they really regard this, I mean, even the Global South scholars, I mean, in Brazil, the Brazilian scholars and so on. So they really appropriated translanguaging to themselves and say that translanguaging it's a decolonial strategy. And of course, I mean, they still struggle with the issue of trans, In South Africa, we have scholars like Kathleen Yu, who initially, she said, I mean, the problem is that the concept come from the North. So those are the kind of things, if you say translanguaging, the concept coming from the North. Again, we are importing a concept coming to us. But within the country, you have got scholars like Professor Makalela, who is becoming a very good authority in this. And in terms of theorizing, he coined the term Ubuntu translanguaging. Ubuntu philosophy, based on Ubuntu philosophy, a person is a person because of other people. So according to his argument is that a language is a language because of other languages. So Ubuntu translanguaging, it really seems to be like our indigenous version of translanguaging, and we have appropriated translanguaging to what we always did. So like people say, but yes, when we say Ubuntu, to speak one word is to say another word should to give a place for another word. If I say a bad word, I'm giving a word for another. Now, so all those things, philosophy of Ubuntu. So I think Afrocentrists, if they approach it from the Southern perspective, they will really see it as a more transformative. Scholars like Sinfri Makoni, who is my friend, I'm used to him. We come from integrationist linguistics. Integrationist linguistics, again, which go against the idea of a code. So they will call you, if you invite Senator Makoni, will argue, that, look, you need to be careful, when you talk about African languages, you might be talking about invented things. African languages as they are invented. They are invented scripts, even the orthography and so on. So when you talk about mother tongue, we'll say there's no such a thing called mother tongue. These are invented and so on and so on. So I think the Afrocentric scholars will want us to come up with an understanding of language policy from which differs from a more global North kind of conception of language policy as a system, as a text. but maybe to focus much on practice. So I think what we are challenging this concept from the global north is that whenever they come to our context, they will theorize, this is how bilingual or work, this is how multilingualism work, this is how language work. They will also argue that, the so-called named language, because when you talk about language, to them, a language must have a name. But with us, language, it's difficult to see the boundary between one language with another. So naming a language to us is not really much. So they will argue that those names are fictitious. Language is a social practice. It cannot be counted. But in the West, because of those nationalist movements, when they create nation states, language was very important. A language is a dialect with an army. So it was something that is very, very, but our ideologies of languages, I think languages is very fluid in our context. So we are even talking of, instead, for example, you say people are pushing for the use of African languages in education. So we are arguing that maybe our planning should not be based on language. Why don't we talk about linguistic repertoires? Our multilingualism is a lingua franca. Our lingua franca is not English. Our lingua franca is multilingualism. So why don't we really focus much on linguistic repertoires than really focusing on language? So the starting point should be, in my university, I've got X number of students. These students, speak various linguistic resources or what's so-called named languages. How do I provide for this? It may not be practical to do that, but how do I face in? So KwaZulu-Natal, if they think that the so-called isiZulu is a key, yes, but they need to understand that the so-called of isiZulu is not one thing. It's more flex. If they get students from Johannesburg, they should know that the king's isiZulu is not going to be there. So it will be, they need to know. I mean, even I think the new king in KwaZulu-Natal, we know that he seems to sometimes speak translingually, not the so-called isiZulu that we used to know. Yeah. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah, thanks very much. Oh, okay. I mean, you couldn't have done it better. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks.
Lovely, Prof. There's another comment for you from Maria in the comments, and it just is it's just to say that it makes so much sense because PCK includes knowledge of the pedagogy to make learning effective, and Angie has commented positively as well. Are there any other questions, colleagues? Otherwise, I think we need to let Prof go and continue with this. Oh, we have another.
There's a hand there. Yeah.
Yes, from Francie. Francie.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see our time is almost up. I just wondered about something practical, as universities embark on making, glossaries available and different departments. We have also started, to make glossaries available, and we will soon have, like the basic teaching and learning action words, describe, define, whatever in the different languages. And there's, for example, in the accounting department, a terminology list, which will be in 5 African languages, most used by students. Will this bring up a whole new issue of copyright? Ubuntu sharing, will it remain the copyright of the certain university or department? Is it open to share this, to build this whole idea of multilingualism? Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thanks, Francis. I think you raise a very, very important question. What I've realized is that, in fact, there is a lot of, that's what the new policy also trying to address, is the policy framework. It puts emphasis on collaboration, that instead of universities working in silos, they need to find ways to collaborate and share resources. So when we developed the ORTB, this was supposed, it's an open resource. It was supposed to be a resource that each university will be able to access and to be able to use, and if needs be able to readapt it back into their own context, download and be able to readapt. For example, you're talking about academic language terms. That I think all these things that we're talking about, define and so on, that glossary has got a huge, I think over 1,000 something academic language terminologies that is in that project. So instead of maybe reinventing and spending, because it's very expensive to translate, One glossary will take you $500,000, you know, to get, if you want to translate it into all the other languages. So what we want, I think definitely the issue of copyright was raised, and we had a problem. Certainly, you see, in certain universities, they like UNISA, the copyright rests with the university. So university will say, if it's Stellenbosch, you know, that the materials developed by our university needs not to be shared. But at UCT, it was clear because I could share, because the copyright at UCT rests with the developer of the material, not the university. So I can give whoever, that's why I donated the whole economic glossary I gave it to put into this project. But in other universities, you're saying copyright is a very difficult thing. So in this conference that is coming, we are going to appeal on behalf of USEF to say to rectors, please, can you make the resources available so that instead of universities reduplicating, you just look at what is there and then you can improve it. After improving it, you can share it back to other universities. So I think my view is that we need really to adopt open education resources, especially for African language, because if we don't do that, there are people who wanted to use business model where then you access this, you pay a certain amount of money. But then the quality remain poor because the glossaries are not being used. But if we make them open resources, so then, you know, people use them and the quality improve, they make feedback and so on, you still have the right to say you want really to, again, maybe to have something that will be really more for your own use, but you again make sure that, you know, that other part is available for use. So the move now is that we need to really, or whatever in fact, the biggest challenge that we have is to first identify, take stock, which resources are available in which university and which resources can be shared so that we can see we've got enough terminology. If you've got 5 languages, then we say, okay, let's get other funding so that one university can add, you know, freely, add another language, KwaZulu-Natal, add isiZulu, another language. So we can make sure that all our glossaries are in 11 official languages without really taking so much cost. So it's a very important, it requires a lot of ideological shift there. It's a very important question.
Thank you so much, Prof. I see you have a thank you from Dumisani Sibia, who is very active in the same area as you, or similar area as you, in terms of translanguaging. Dumisani gave a masterclass himself a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So across these masterclasses, we are really getting such amazing information and such informative and constructive presentations. If there are no other questions from the colleagues, then it's 11 o'clock, and I think all that remains is to say thank you so very much for your energy and enthusiasm and for exciting us all about this continued developments in using all our languages in our classrooms. Thank you so much.
No, thanks so much, Gloria. I really appreciate this. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Good stuff. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Prof. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay,
Goodbye.
Thank you so much. All the best for you. Bye.
Thank you, Prof.